think Dave is going to talk tonight about the flood.
That might be a
And
good thing
how
to
the
talk about. What,
flood
you think I ought to do
is-
that?
I think you ought to do that, but I want to just review for the kids. Do you remember design and the wonderful design that God put into animals? And then when we talked about biology, we looked at how death came into the world and suffering and disease because of Adam's sin. And tonight we're going to get to Genesis 6 through 8, and we see that because of the evil and wickedness that came into the world, God sent that judgment at the time of the flood. And so we'll be looking at that tonight. This kind of goes with Genesis 6 through 8. And Dave's going to share. I guess you already got your slides up there.
I'm all ready.
All righty.
As long as other people. Yeah, we get one of the biggest questions we get is, can you really believe in the flood? And is the geology, doesn't that prove millions of years and all that kind of stuff? And I can remember way back when, I love that story because I had a student ask very pointedly at the end of one of my sessions, "You don't believe in Noah and the flood, do you?" I said, "Sure, don't you?" He said, "How did Noah get all those stinking animals on board that little tiny boat?" And so that was rather interesting. That was at the Colorado School of Mines. Uh, so I asked him a question. How big was the boat? He didn't know. I asked him how many animals had to go on board. He didn't know. And so I told him that what you're trying to say is that an unknown number of animals can't fit on board a boat of unknown size. And so we have to go to the Bible to find that size of that ark. And we find out that that ark would have been at least 1.5 to 2 football fields in length. There's plenty of room for all the animals. You can do the calculations, all the animals that needed to go on board that boat with no problem whatsoever. And but students over and over and over again are knocked out of the saddle in their belief because they get questioned. How can you believe in the flood? How can you get all those species of animals? It's actually kinds that God would have taken. But regardless of that, it's a big stumbling block for an awful lot of students. But the flood turns out to be one of the most documented biblical events. It is also, the flood is was basically adhered to by so many of the biblical writers. Well, God wrote the Bible, but all the different books all basically are flood related as well, or at least mention that. And so it is a documented event. Even Jesus believed in the flood. So if it was good enough for Jesus to believe in the flood, I guess I ought to believe in it too, huh? But other cultures around the world also have this particular recollection of the flood. And like Mesopotamia, the cuneiform tablets there, way before Christ, and it talks about that flood. It's a good description of it. There are several Babylonian documents talking about the very same flood. And in fact, the Sumerian king list also names kings who reigned for long periods of time. And when you do the mathematics on their base system, it turns out that their kings fit the biblical patriarchs prior to the flood. But then a great flood came. Then after the flood, the Sumerian kings ruled for much shorter periods of time. And that fits pretty well with what we see in the biblical record. People lived to be 900 years of age back then. And then the flood came, and then their lifespan started going down. And you can see now how the life began going down, the lifespan started going down, 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 down. Today, if you live to be 100 years, you're doing really well, aren't you? And so something happened at the time of the flood that caused lifespans to decrease. And you say, well, that looks like a good curve, but what about that guy? Well, that was Enoch. He didn't die. God took him directly. And but the rest of them lived to be around 900 years. Even Noah lived to be close to 950 years. 950 years. And Methuselah, 969. And skeptics will say, see, that's just myth. There's no way people could live that long. But if you want to think biblically, you ask the question, the Bible says that. I wonder what the conditions were like to allow those patriarchs to live such long lives. And it's a possibility that there are several key things that may have happened. And we may get into a little bit of those tonight. Well, the Babylonian clay cuneiform also talks about the flood. And in fact, they had a lot of detail of the flood, but not the detail that the Bible gives. And some people say, well, maybe the Bible account was actually borrowed from this. The problem is their particular ark is shaped like a tin can. I would not like to be in that ark for a full year on rough seas with the flood. I think I get seasick enough just in a regular boat. Anyhow, the Gilgamesh epic, 11th tablet, talks about an ark, animals taken on board the ark, birds sent out during the flood, ark landed on a mountain, sacrifice offered after the ark landed. Now, you see a lot of parallels between this account and the biblical account in Noah's day, don't you? And so people say, well, maybe the Bible is borrowed from the Gilgamesh epic. The problem is their ark is shaped like a cube. And again, I wouldn't want to ride around in that for a year in the high seas of a flood. So as we look at that, I think what we're looking at is maybe the other accounts are borrowed from the biblical account. Part of the reason for it is we see flood legends all around the world. And a lot of the names that they give of the person that was in that ark, like Noah in the Bible, you find Noah. You find other things that sound a lot like Noah. And not only that, but look at the biblical record. And some people say, oh, Noah's flood is just a myth. Oh, good story. But wait a minute, how does a myth start? You usually hear this in storytellers. Once upon a time, in a far distant land, right? But look at the specific dates and events that Noah records. I call the Noahic account in Genesis chapter 6 through 8 and into 9, I call it Noah's ship log. Note those specific dates. When did the flood start? Year 1, month 2, day 17, not once upon a time. In fact, it says here, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 7th day of the month, or 17th day, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the skies were opened. So what are we seeing? Detail, not only in the specific day the flood starts, but also two different sources for the water. One from the skies, the other one looks like it's coming from beneath. But then the account continues, and it basically talks about what happened on various months and days, when the tops of the mountains were viewed, when the birds were sent out, and when Noah was actually told to actually leave the ark. So add it all up, you find out Noah was on that boat for approximately 371 days. That's over a year. Wow. That's no local flood, by the way, with that kind of duration. It isn't. And it was not just a little bit of rain at all. That's not what it was. Is that bar still down here? I don't know how to get rid of it, but anyhow.
It looks good to me, Dave.
Oh, good. It was not just a little bit of rain. The sky, windows of heaven were open, and then the fountains of the great deep opened up. That was not a little bit. So it is a violent thing until the entire world is covered by water. Now, you don't get that in a local flood. And there are a lot of church colleges that are saying that Noah's flood, just a local flood, preserved all the geologic layers for millions and millions of years. But no, it's a worldwide flood. And why would I say that? Well, why would you need a huge ark, 1.5 to 2 football fields in length, for some local event? The inclusive language of destruction in the Bible. All flesh perished from under heaven, except for that which is on the ark. Again, inclusive language of destruction. Why take birds on the ark if some local event? But no, Noah took birds as well, didn't he? The water covers the tops of the tallest mountains. What happens if we cover, let's say, Pikes Peak in Colorado? What does that do to where the rest of you are living? Water doesn't stack up. You're underwater too. You are under lots and lots of water. And then here's where skeptics enter in again. And they say, well, wait a minute, that's the way we know it's a fairy tale, because we do not have enough water to cover the tops of the tallest mountains. Well, but when you look at the tops of the tallest mountains, what do you see? You see rock layers there that were once mud, sandstones, shales, limestones, and they contain fossils of creatures which once swam in the ocean. So at least we know that those mountains were underwater. And guess what? That includes the tallest mountain in the world, Mount Everest. And even the last 1,000 feet of Mount Everest, at least, is covered with sedimentary rocks with fossils. That doesn't prove the flood, by the way. It just shows that that mountain was underwater at one time. And standard geologists would say, yeah, big forces in the earth pushed that mountain to its present position over multiple hundreds of millions of years. Well, they have their explanation. I think the mountains rose up and the valley sank down, according to Psalm 104 in the Bible. Can you imagine mountains pushing up out of that flood, coming up to their present position? And it doesn't take long then to really make a mountain range when that happens. And so the duration of the flood, I said, Noah being on the ark for 371 days, and God sent the promise of a rainbow, never to flood the earth like that again. But we've had a lot of local floods. So if the flood of Noah's day, as some Bible colleges teach, was just a local flood, then God didn't keep his promise, did he? No, this is a very worldwide event. Some have described it as being the type of event where you take a globe and you stick it in a swimming pool. I mean, the whole world is covered to a depth of approximately 22 feet of water. When you do that, you're also going to create huge currents, which are going to be traveling back and forth across the face of the earth. you're going to find out this flood is responsible for the death of so many creatures, including humans. And you're going to find out then the fossil record will be probably best explained by this type of a global event. So how do you get all the mud to bury fossils? It's a big event. It's a flood. When you see mud, petrified sandstone, sea mud, think flood. We're going to talk about that more today too. So there's much geologic evidence worldwide. And I want to mention something. When I look at those rock layers, I see a different picture than a lot of people will see. In fact, who do you see in that picture? So many people will say Marilyn Monroe. Kind of looks like Marilyn Monroe, right? But let's just blow up. Let's just look closer at the evidence and see if it is Marilyn. So we blow up that picture. No tricks involved. No, we find out it was Einstein all along. And so that's what happens when you look more closely at the evidence, you see different pictures. And same thing for me, being brought up, trained in geology, I see evidence of the flood now, but I didn't back then. And I see a different picture than I used to see. They used to tell you that these rock layers here took millions of years to form. But think about it. These rock layers have rocks in it that are, some of them are the size of a large dump truck. And it's water worn, except cracked across the face of it. Wow, water worn boulders, 600 feet tall. Some of them the size of a dump truck. That doesn't sound like a local flood, does it? It sounds like some kind of a global event. Here's another spot in California where you see these great big rocks, layer after layer, separated by smaller rocks. And what you have is high velocity currents carrying and then dropping big rocks, lower velocity currents carrying smaller materials and dropping that. And so you get pulsating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a whole bunch of layers very quickly. And some of those rocks are about half the size of that Jeep. So we're looking at evidence of catastrophic deposition here. That fits with Noah's flood. In another spot in California, not too far from the Anza-Borrego, or from Split Mountain, where I just showed you, you see this rock formation here, but it is also made up of water-worn boulders rolled around in streams and in currents in very great depth because there's lots of big rock, but it's pushing its way into the formation here on your right, kind of like a fist into a layer cake. Notice how the layer cake bends down this way, bends up this way. That still had to be soft when this arrived. And yet standard geology will teach you that these layers were put down over millions and millions of years. Well, that would have turned into solid rock before this event actually occurred. So it looks like this was catastrophically laid down. And in the same event, this material and the blacker material on the left, all of a sudden forced its way, bending the layers up and down. Again, catastrophic flood is what we're looking at. You know, Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. It gave us a new picture of geology. Before that time, it was a gorgeous mountain, very nice place to go visit. What a place for a cabin, right? But then mountain began to smoke. And pretty soon cracks developed, craters developed. Then they noticed something very troubling, that mountain was beginning to bulge. And it began to bulge between 18 and up to 40 feet per day to the north. And geologists said, get out of there. This mountain is going to explode. And sure enough, May 18th, 1980, those big cracks caused a huge landslide, and 1/3 of the mountain began to slide away, and the mountain began the famous Mount St. Helens eruption, a major volcano. But everybody thinks how big that is. But if you ever come with us on our Yellowstone National Park creation tour, you find out this was actually a little pop gun compared to Yellowstone. Yellowstone was thousands of times bigger than Mount St. Helens. And so, and left amazing features that you need to come see. Anyhow, well, Mount St. Helens is a wonderful place to visit today. Now that it's quit smoking, here you see a before and after. Notice how much of the mountain we lost. But since that mountain blew, a recent volcanic lava dome built up within it. And so the mountain is rebuilding again. But we're going to talk about that lava dome right there later, okay, in this tonight's program. And so 1/3 of the mountain disappeared. So we lost that, but we gained a lot of understanding about layer formations. You look down there, you find out, look at all of those layers. They're fine layers. They're amazing. And layer after layer after layer. The thing is, people would say, oh, it takes millions of years to put down layers like that. But no, all of the layers you are looking at occurred in about 3 days. And that was all. That's amazing what can happen in that particular time frame. I've been at the Badlands. You know what they will tell you at the Badlands? It would take millions of years to put down these layers. You might ask the ranger, sir, how do you know how old those layers are? Well, you know, it's all been dated by radioactive decay dating. And they'll say, but think about the layers. They're some of the same material that you find at Yellowstone, at Mount St. Helens. And we know that those layers can happen in a few days, and they don't take millions of years to form. Well, the ranger might tell you that, well, Mount St. Helens was a special event. This is a different one. Well, yeah, that's true. But suppose these layers were also put down catastrophically in a very short period of time. There's no reason why not. Now you might be told that, well, look at this type of erosion. You can't get that kind of erosion in a short time. That takes eons of time. Not really. We found out from I got my mind on Yellowstone, don't I? We found out from Mount St. Helens that secondary steam blast occurred through the freshly laid deposits. And what they produced were steam pits. Now look at this, same type of erosional pattern as the Badlands has. Well, how long did this take? Well, this entire steam pit was formed only in one part of 1 day. It doesn't take that long. And this is not small. It is about 1/4 mile across the narrowest part here. 1/4 mile, one big steam blast. So it doesn't take long to make even Badland topography, does it? You see, the conditions are more important than the time. Okay, this is the Mount St. Helens Canyon. It is actually not on the map prior to 1980. But look at that little river. Wouldn't you think it took millions of years for this little tiny creek to carve this big canyon? Well, you would think that, but no, this entire canyon was carved mostly in 1 day. In 1 day, because the secondary events at Mount St. Helens melted these glaciers, and the glaciers turned into water and flowed downstream in a catastrophic flow that carved out this particular canyon for miles and miles. Doesn't take long to carve a canyon, does it? If you have enough water. And by the way, that canyon goes for 8 miles back there, all carved, probably most of it in a day, most of it. Here's what Peter Frenzen said. quoted in National Geographic, you'd expect a hard rock canyon to be thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years old. But this was cut in less than a decade, less than 10 years, and the bulk of it one day. And notice he said hard rock canyon. You can cut right through hard rock as well, given the right conditions. All right. So I think in the flood of Noah's day, there's enough water mixed with sand and everything else, just chewing things up, carving out great big canyons in a short period of time. You go to Bryce Canyon National Park in Utah, and there you see a whole bunch of petrified mud. And I was saying, when you see mud, what do you think? Flood. Think flood, giving you those layers, and then erosion that happens afterwards. This is a gorgeous spot to go visit, by the way. We take students there on field trips, and maybe you can join us someday. Right here in Grand Junction, Colorado, we have the Colorado National Monument. And the Colorado National Monument is basically in our backyard. We live down here someplace in the valley. And the rangers will tell you that it took millions of years for this little wash, a little bit of water at a time, to carve this big canyon. But no, I think there was a lot more water. In fact, you go to another spot just a short ways away, and you see a canyon within a canyon. And so what you're looking at, look at the broad canyon here, and look at how it narrowed down through here. And so what we're looking at is a lot of water flow here, and then channelized water when the water has already mostly dissipated from the runoff of Noah's flood and the aftermath of it as well. You know, it doesn't take much to carve out solid rock. This is at the Glen Canyon Dam. Lake Powell is a long lake. It's 186 miles long. And the water level is lower today, so it's going to go down a little bit for the length. But the thing is, look at that tube. That was an overflow tube on the Glen Canyon Dam. And that was supposed to take the excess water in case they had a lot of water one particular year. Well, they built that thing with 3 feet of solid concrete, reinforced with steel. And what happened is turbulence, because where they had to open up their floodgate, the turbulence of it caused a cavitation process. It's like water bubbles bursting. And that actually began to chew away at the rock. And within hours, you have this amount of erosion, a cubic basketball court of erosion occurred in just a couple hours. That's what water can do. And turbulent water can do it even faster. And then pretty soon, when you get that turbulence, you get big rocks carried into the water, which really blasts things out as well. So Glen Canyon Dam, they almost lost the dam that particular year on at Glen Canyon. And so let's go to another spot. Think about a lot of water in a short period of time. You understand the conditions are more important than the actual time. This is Eastern Washington, Dry Falls. What do you mean falls? I don't see a waterfall there. Well, yeah, it's dry, but there used to be one. And in fact, these are plunge pools from a huge waterfall that used to go over that thing. But notice it looks flatter than a pancake across here, right? Whoa, what do you mean waterfall? That means you have a huge volume of water coming over the horizon. Yep, that's what you would expect if there was a flood. But also, there may be another thing that would have caused it too. And in fact, we go to go to Missoula, Montana, and you see shorelines of an ancient lake. And all of a sudden, they're realizing that even though it's separated by hundreds of miles, these shorelines of a lake has to do with this right here in Eastern Washington. So Missoula, Montana here, There was a giant lake at one time surrounding and drowning, you might say, what is today Missoula, Montana, to a depth of at least 1,000 feet. All right. That's a lot of water there. And the idea is now there was a big lake dammed up when ice blocked this particular section of the Columbia River, and the ice pushed forward, blocked the river, and then this big, huge lake now formed behind it. Now, keep in mind, this big lake, Scott Leisner, is bigger than the country of Costa Rica. It is monstrous, okay? Anyhow, it would have drowned Missoula 900 feet deep right here. But at the dam, downstream a little ways, it would have been approximately 2,000 feet deep. That's pretty deep, isn't it? Now, ice isn't the best thing to basically make a dam out of, because it will begin to crack and break and etc. And sure enough, according to standard geology today, that ice dam broke, and this 500 cubic miles of water suddenly was discharged downstream, taking with it ancient Lake Columbia, which was in the Spokane area. And then those two lakes now catastrophically drained down to the west, down to the south. And when it did, it formed huge canyons. Can you imagine a body of water, 500 cubic miles of it, all of a sudden being discharged at one time? You can imagine what kind of erosion, what kind of flood you will have downstream. We can't even draw a picture of what it would look like. But when we saw the horizon here of dry falls, guess what? The water depth would have been at least 300 to 400 feet deeper or higher than the level here. And in fact, I did a little bit of scouting around there. I actually found evidence of this flood that was even indicating that the water depth might have been up to 700 feet deep here. Wow, that's a lot of water. And this water and this flood is traveling at least 65 miles per hour. That's a lot of water at a lot high velocity, chewing up this whole area. This is an aerial view of where we were looking at dry falls. We looked at dry falls down here, right? And but this is now an aerial view here, and looking upstream. But look at how everything is chewed up in here. Let's look at another view of that thing. And basically this entire lake, according to standard geology, all of a sudden would have come from this direction down this way, carving out a series of canyons, including this one, and leaving falls in its path. Here's the canyon right here. And how long did it take to have all that water dissipate? Well, most all of it was gone within 24 to 48 hours. And wow, that's a lot of water going down through there. This amount of water would have drowned Portland, Oregon, a long ways away to a depth of over 400 feet. And Multnomah Falls left as what's now called a standing waterfall. Water now comes this way, then goes straight down. And before, it used to probably go at an angle into the Columbia Gorge. So 24 to 48 hours. Time is not the hero of the plot. It's the conditions, isn't it? This is now looking downstream from the same dry falls that we saw here. But look at all these channels here. Look at the water channels. You can see it. And you notice dry fall here, but look at this big channel over here. Now there's a channel coming in this direction, etc. And it's 22 miles from here to Salt Lake City, and all this big canyon formed within 24 to 48 hours, plus a whole bunch more different features, like, for instance, Palouse Falls, Eastern Washington as well. Palouse Falls. This is 180 feet tall. This amount of water here. That's a tall waterfall. Look at the giant plunge pool down below it, though. And you notice, wait a minute, that's a big plunge pool. I think there was more water going down through there. And sure enough, we look at it, look at the hills in the background. Notice how it's water kind of rolling hill now. It's been water flooded is what it is. And there are gravel deposits too, indicating that the water was probably over the horizon at one time. And when it did, it carved out that particular canyon further downstream as well. And this, if you take the flying leap, it is 1,300 feet from here to the bottom where you jump, finally land. And so that is a major canyon, but again, 24 to 48 hours. They find layers too downstream. Look at these freshly laid layers from that. But now look at those compared to these layers over here that you might find at the Grand Canyon. Very similar. And yet these took only 24 to 48 hours. And they say these took millions of years. I think millions of years aren't necessary. The conditions of a lot of water is correct. Downstream, you find what's called Quincy Basin, and that's an area where a lot of the rocks and the debris settled. And in fact, you see these big boulders here and here. This one's about the size of a house. And how long did it take to move those boulders? Well, it's all part of the same flood called the Missoula Flood. These are some of the students that was taken out on a field trip to the Pacific Northwest out there from Jackson Hole Bible College. Let's go to a different flood. Okay, let's go to.
Could I ask a question a minute?
Sure.
So we were there in Eastern Washington visiting our daughter last year, this time around. And one of the things that I researched, have you ever looked at the giant ripples in that area?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I should mention those all the way from Spokane on across, huge ripple marks. Or you go up even into Montana and Camas Prairie in Montana, and you find ripple marks as much as 30 feet tall and 500 from ridge to ridge. So think about the ripples on a beach. Okay, water washing over there make little ripple marks, and those only a couple inches in between them. But these are 500 feet in between ridge to ridge and 30 feet tall. And you stand on a high point up there, you look down and you see immediately the what looks like giant ripple marks. And that is what basically allowed people to understand what actually caused this formation of these canyons, etc. They thought maybe it was glaciation. But then when they were able to look at some of the evidence, and then later when they had aerial photography, they saw those ripple marks, amazing ripple marks. And they said, ooh, this is one big flood. But a lot of people did not accept that. Standard geologists did not accept it because it sounded too much like Noah's flood, didn't it? And they weren't willing to accept that. And but it was probably, maybe Noah's flood had a little bit to do with it, but it was probably the collapse of ancient Lake Missoula that did most all of that damage out there. But ripple marks are really important to recognize. Anytime I look at rolling hills now, whether I am up there in the Pacific Northwest or if I'm closer to your neck of the woods, in Minnesota, guess what? What I see is ripple marks. I see great big rolling hills. And interesting thing about it, they say, oh, it's sand or fine blown loess, it's called. It's this wind deposited it. But the thing about it is what the control is underneath it happens to be huge gravel deposits. And then the lust came in over the top of that. And so the wind did not blow the gravel. Okay. That's a big water deposit. So look for ripple marks anywhere you look, whether you're in Minnesota, maybe down Kansas City area. You see them as well, Pacific Northwest. I'm starting to see them in so many places all around the country. So anyhow, these are some of the big boulders from well, I should talk about the Salt Lake City area. Notice the big shoreline right here. There was an ancient Lake Bonneville shoreline. There was a much bigger lake than the Great Salt Lake at one time. They now realize that this shoreline is connected with these great big boulders near Twin Falls, Idaho. So what you see at Salt Lake, now drive a long ways to get to Twin Falls, Idaho, and you see these boulders. These boulders were actually washed from the area close by, but from the giant flood from the Bonneville Lake when it spilled. And some of those boulders look like a potato field out there, but those potatoes are the size of automobiles. And so we know that the water depth was a couple 100 feet above that. And so those shorelines are approximately 1,000 feet higher than the present Great Salt Lake. And so, wow, think about 1/3 of the state of Utah being covered by the ancient Lake Bonneville. And when you actually see that and you say, whoa, that's a lot of water. Again, Scott, bigger than the state of Costa Rica or the country of Costa Rica. Okay. So that's a lot of water that catastrophically drained this direction. When it did, some of it shot up toward Jackson, Wyoming. The rest of it went down toward Boise, Twin Falls, etc. And then eventually went down what's called Hell's Canyon on the Idaho and Oregon border. Okay. But 22,500 square miles of lake, catastrophically, the top 500 feet, catastrophically drained, forming the Snake River Canyon. According to standard geology, there's a signpost there now. They say at the signpost, this is the research that has been done. This canyon was not there 30 days before this event of the collapse of Lake Bonneville. Now notice again, a lot of water, big plunge pool here, right? But look at the falls. It's not all that huge compared to the size of the plunge pool. That tells me there's a lot more water. And in fact, where were those great big boulders found? On top of the rim, right up here. That means the water depth was 200 feet deeper than the rim. And then basically all that material being carried down there, carved out this part of the Snake River Canyon. All right. In fact, a geomorphologist by the name of Viduri said that about 95% of all of the rivers and streams in the world are what he called underfit. That means, like for instance, you're not going to explain this big canyon by this amount of water coming through it. But he said 95% of all the rivers and streams in the world you can't explain by the present flow. All of it had a lot more water going through that. That fits with Noah's flood, the drainage as the mountains rose up, the valley sank down, and the aftermath of the flood as well. For instance, great big inland lakes suddenly bursting through their dams and carving big canyons as well. All right, now we talked about a couple of floods. Missoula Flood was one, and there is a flood in Siberia, according to this article here, in it's 10 times larger than Missoula Flood was, according to the article. And entire mountain ridges were left as ripple marks, okay? And so ripple marks. But now, how much water is in this particular flood? If you add up all of the waters in all of the rivers today, all the main ones, Amazon, Nile, Colorado. Okay, you get all these big rivers. Add up all of those rivers. Now let's take that amount of water in those rivers and multiply that by 100. And you get the amount of flow that was going through this region right here at one time. Wow, that's a lot of water. It could do a lot of damage and change the entire topography in a short time. This now is in Australia. It's called Wave Rock. It goes for 7 miles over here. And yet you can imagine the water rolling over this thing. But today it's bone dry. There's no water. But you can imagine the amount of water at one time that was actually present in a big collapsed lake. So in other words, time, I want to reiterate, is not the hero of the plot. The conditions are more important. A lot of water can do a lot more damage in a very short period of time than the millions of years will ever do. Okay. You know, Charles Darwin was on the ship called the Beagle and sailed along the coast of South America. And he saw some volcanic layers. And he was reading a book while trying to talk about long ages of geologic history. And he saw those layers of volcanism. And then he parroted what was in the book. And he said, oh, millions, or he said eons of time in order to make all of these volcanic layers. Well, guess what? We saw all those type of layers formed in 1 to 3 days at Mount St. Helens. Okay. And then he used this idea of time to look at small changes and say finches and said, aha, evolution over long periods of time. Small changes make great big changes. And then Darwin later said he can imagine how those small changes can mount up until eventually you have a bear possibly turning into a whale. That's what he actually stated. And well, one of the other things he did, besides seeing the volcanic layers, he saw this river. They took a boat and went up this river, and he looked at it and said, wow, look at this. And he said, there's not that much water here, but grain of sand by grain of sand, this river carved out this little canyon through here. Well, guess what? Charles Darwin missed some things. There were some big boulders up here on this bench that he never got up to. He didn't. And there are also big boulders in here too. He missed those things right there, like this boulder pile here. And now the common idea is what carved this particular Santa Cruz River? A collapse of a lake upstream, carving down through this thing in a very short period of time. It doesn't take much time at all. You see why I see a different picture in geology. I recognize that time is not the hero of the plot, it's the conditions. And so many things, as I used to believe in the millions and millions of years of geologic history, I found out you can explain just as easily, and now it looks like even better, by catastrophic geology, which fits the Noahic flood. All right, now, and so when I look at a canyon like this, I see evidence of the flood. When I look at the, oh, wow, this is a Canyonlands, right? This is the Green River overlook at the Canyonlands. What do I see? I see a huge water flow here, carving this out in a very short period of time by the collapse of another great big lake. Going right down the Grand Canyon eventually. Now, you can join our staff for a caravan tour of Canyonlands here. See these event things, plus a lot more gorgeous things and amazing things. So you can do that, and you can also join us on that part that goes to Arches National Park. So 2 major national parks, April 9 and 10, coming up fairly soon. So you might want to register. It's amazing what you're going to see there. Absolutely amazing there. Okay, so I see a different picture. I see a flood, don't I? And not the millions and millions of years. Okay, the standard interpretation, of course, is the millions of years, isn't it? But what if there was a huge lake upstream from the Grand Canyon? How long do you think it would take to carve this canyon? Compared to the size of this lake, you say, well, that's just a little canyon, even though this thing is 260 miles long. Uh-huh. That's a lot of water in through here. And so it would not take long to form that particular Grand Canyon if you have enough water. And there seems to be some indication of that. Not necessarily only of a great big lake collapsing, but even the flood waters of Noah running off of the mountains as the Uncompahgre uplift began coming up out of that ocean. So you see that type of sheet wash coming across several states. When we give tours, we point that out sometimes as well. And then we see as water begin to channelize, you start the formation of the canyon. Then as one lake collapses into another lake, like a domino effect, pretty soon you have main erosion of the Grand Canyon. It doesn't take long, by the way. And remember those big boulders the size of a dump truck? Those are right downstream from the Grand Canyon with the same type of rock that's found just a little bit upriver. So it's, again, a smoking gun. Looks like it could easily fit. Possibly weeks to carve a Grand Canyon, not millions of years. All right. Black Canyon of the Gunnison, right close by our hometown. And we may go see that during our training week that we have. That's April 4 through 8. And if you take a flying leap and try to jump in the river, you're going to die. But the flying leap will take you 1,600 feet straight down from here to the bottom of the river. And according to standard geology, it took millions of years to carve that canyon, right? But to me, it looks like a great big tear in the earth. What I call a tear fault. Big tear. Doesn't take long if there's a huge earthquake to form one big canyon. And that's what it looks like at Black Canyon of the Gunnison. It's another amazing place to see. All right. You just go to the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. There you see the snow-crested Sierra Nevadas, and you see this valley down below. You look more carefully. You say, wait a minute. This almost looks like an island in some kind of a wash, a flow here. Well, that's what I started seeing because my eyes are getting trained for that. And so then you go down this cliff right here and you find out, yeah, you can climb down there, but you find out that the rocks are all sculpted by moving water, and a lot of it. This is solid volcanic basalt. That's lava, okay? And again, evidence of a lot more water going down through that particular area. And let's go to another spot, Death Valley, California. You know, if you have a lot of water discharge, that water's got to stop somewhere. But it's not just water. Keep in mind, as soon as this flood starts, as soon as you have it, it's just water mixed with sand, mixed with mud, mixed with boulders. It's a huge cement slurry that's going downstream. And the cement then it'll turn to cement when it stops. When it finally gets to a resting spot, it stops and the cement hardens. Okay. And in fact, that's what we see at Mosaic Canyon in Death Valley. You see this flow of water and mud and sand. It actually took some of the particles from that cement slurry going downstream at high velocity even. And what it ended up doing is carving this canyon, but also coating the edge of the canyon. It coats the edge of the canyon. And that's why they call it Mosaic Canyon. And here you see the mosaic carved out here, but look at this. Here's part of the dump. Here's part of the dump right here. That's where that water's and mud slurry stopped, the lowest spot in North America, Death Valley. All right, so you can imagine water barreling down into another lake, and there's evidence of a lake back there. You're going to see a slide in a minute, but you see the water barreling in. Once you barrel a high velocity flow into a calmer lake, the bigger material drops out first, then the finer material, and then the real fine material afterwards. And that's exactly what we see at Death Valley. Okay. Now, a lot of people don't realize that, but Death Valley is a big hot spot on the earth, kind of like the Sahara Desert. But interesting, you see this right here? There's evidence of this. These are shorelines or at least water flow patterns. Right here, Death Valley. You can actually see it here. But now they're realizing that even the Sahara Desert had a lot more water into it. The lush green Sahara, an article by Michael Ord. Dr. Ord shows that what happened evidently is that the tropical zone, which is just to the south of the Sahara, kind of pushed upward or went down further. So it's now desert where the Sahara Desert is, but it's tropical, it's just a few hundred miles south. And it's as much as 600 miles difference. And so what are we looking at? Lush green Sahara. How do they know that? Well, because of the plant fossils found. Also, now they're finding that there were fish. There are certain oases that was just not that long ago that they reported alligators in those in the Sahara, and crocodiles, ocean-going fish as well. Big channels. You can actually do a certain type of survey of it, and you actually can see the channel of an ancient river down underneath it that had saltwater fish in it. Okay, so you understand, I see evidence of the flood. I don't see the millions and millions of years at all, do I? And you look at the, people say, well, wait a minute, hasn't radiometric dating methods proven that all of those layers were put down over millions of years? We hear that all the time, but no, not necessarily. The only way to know how old these rocks are would be to have a eyewitness report. We don't have any there, do we, that form the Grand Canyon? So how do you know these dating methods are correct? You're using them to date something of unknown age. The only way to tell is to date something of known age and see if you're right. See if you get good numbers. And sure enough, Mount St. Helens erupted 30, 40 years ago. At that time, within 30 years, that volcanic lava dome built up that I mentioned earlier. And there's the lava dome up in here. They decided to date the lava of that lava dome. Should be, at that point, was 30 years is what the date should be when that had actually cooled. But no, the dates they got were 340,000 to 2.8 million years old. Whoa, something's wrong with that method, right? And that's Mount St. Helens. Same thing in New Zealand, the same type of numbers of something they knew that occurred. Recent flows of lava in Hawaii, they actually knew when that happened. And they dated when it all cooled now, 3 million to 1 billion years. Something is drastically wrong with the dating method. So that has to be taken into consideration. Well, we have volcans thrown at the Grand Canyon. The lava flowed down into the canyon at one time, blocked the river for a while. Now, keep in mind, this is recent. these layers underneath the entire canyon should be ancient according to standard geology. The millions of years camp would say it was. But the problem is when you date this recent volcanic lava flow, they ended up with dates at least as old and up to twice as old as these rock layers that they could date underneath the canyon. Now, you can't date all the layers anyhow, but you can date those that have especially this particular type of constituency of volcanics in it. Those are the ones they try dating. But look, they say all of these dates give you the same reading, so therefore they must be correct. Well, look at this. There are 6 dates all the way from thousands of years to 17 million years. Rubidium strontium, 1.2 to 1.3 billion years. Wow, here's one, 2.6 billion years. And all of these dates aren't the same, are they? They're widely separated. And yet, keep in mind, this volcanic lava flow was dated at least as old and up to twice as old as these layers down here. Something's wrong with the method. All right. So if rocks of known age give you horrible results by these radioactive decay dating methods, how do you rely on the same dating methods to give you good results on rocks of unknown age? Okay, a good thing to think about, isn't it? All right, well, I see flood. Well, I see flood in other ways too. I see it in mass burial. Mass burial. This down in Texas, they have all these fossilized whole clams. Interesting that they're all whole, but they find millions of those things down there. The fact that they're whole tells you they were buried and buried rapidly. They didn't have a chance to dig their way out of the mud as it was being put down. That's catastrophic flow, burying them, the whole clam together. And it is a big mass burial. There's another mass burial in the Grand Canyon of these fossil nautiloids in this particular area of the Redwall limestone. All right. And the nautiloids are, you might have seen these beautiful coiled nautiluses. They're a different variety, but those are the coiled. These are the straight kind right here. But these fossils are anywhere from a few inches long up to 3 feet in length, and they're all buried together. That doesn't happen naturally. It sounds like a flood possibly, okay? And that's a mass burial of nautiloids. If you can get this book from AOI office, you can order that if you wish. And I would really highly recommend it. It's a guidebook to the Grand Canyon, and it has all kinds of fold-out pages, and it's like me being there talking to you. You're looking at the canyon on the other side, and my laser pointer won't point across that canyon, but the circles on those pages of that book will show you exactly what you're looking at, like the Coconino Sandstone right here. Great big bathtub ring of the Grand Canyon. But it'll tell you what the significance of it is too. So this is a really good book to take with you to the Grand Canyon, or just sit at home and take a tour of the Grand Canyon. You can do that too. We find up around Kemmerer, Wyoming, this place called Fossil Butte National Monument. And in that particular area, in this particular spot, here's one slab in the museum with 360 fish, perfectly preserved, not even a fin out of place. Now, when a fish rots, everything gets jumbled up. And so that means it was buried and buried very rapidly. We find bigger fish, 2 feet, 3 feet long, alligators 13 feet long, preserved in the very same layers. Here's a palm frond that is 10 feet long with fish as well. Now notice no deterioration. That means it was buried really rapidly. Well, how rapidly? Well, this guy is eating his lunch when both of them got trapped. Again, we're talking about catastrophic burial here. And that's Kemmerer, Wyoming. Go to the Dinosaur National Monument, which is a fabulous place to go. It's just a couple hours out of Grand Junction. And you go up there and you see all of these petrified bones in the sandstone. Now, what's happening is they began to weather out. Now they're starting to work them out. They're finding at Dinosaur 92 different dinosaurs preserved. Here are several different ones, all preserved, massed together, kind of like they were mashed together by some kind of a flood. Okay. And some of the flooding shows the big old long necked dinosaur with the neck bent way back behind his head, back behind his head. What does that tell you? He's dying of lack of oxygen here. He's got buried and buried rapidly in that mud. And that fits beautifully with the flood. You know, it doesn't take long to make oil. They're making oil in 1 hour in labs right now. So it doesn't take millions of years to do it. Okay. All right. I'm coming close to the end of this, but I want to talk to you about how I view geology frequently. When I look at layers of rock as designated by this picture or these layers here, I think of pancakes. And boy, do I ever get hungry. I think about this big old stack of pancakes with blueberries in it and syrup coming off of it. There's the butter on the top. But I look at these rock layers as great big pancake pours. One batter on top of another batter on top of another batter. Now, what would you do if you saw one petrified tree going through all of these layers? It tells you those layers can't be millions of years old because that tree would have rotted. Well, let's go to the eastern United States. And there you see one tree here, one tree here. There's another one here, all going through multiple layers of geologic history. Wow. That tells me these layers were put down in a very short cataclysmic event, such as Noah's flood, rather than over millions and millions of years, as is taught in all the schools basically across the country. So here's another view of this particular one. Here's one that's actually, you could see this view in National Geographic. This is also one found in New Zealand. And they find them in Australia. You find them in Hungary, Nova Scotia. These are called poly, meaning many, straight, meaning strata. These are trees that transcend many, many strata. And that, to me, says those could not have been put down over millions of years, these layers. This had to have been very rapidly laid down. That fits with the flood, doesn't it? Now, I want you to think about that stack of pancakes. What would you do? What would you think if the bottom pancake layer somehow was still fluid and pushed up through all of the other layers and right up through the syrup and the butter? What would you think? Those layers would have to have been soft. So if they were still soft, there could not have been millions of years of geologic history there. It would have been solid concrete. All right. Well, we find that as well. This is Kodachrome Basin in Utah. We see how the bottom layer just pokes its way. It's a sandstone layer, pokes its way up through all of the other layers, representing at the minimum here of 30 million years of supposed geologic history, right up through the butter, right? All the way through. What does that tell you? These layers still had to be soft, including this one, when all this stuff was happening. It looks like possibly during a flood, there's some kind of thing happening which puts a force over here someplace, back over here, And when you put force, hydraulics teaches you that that force is now dissipated in all kinds of directions. Okay. And now that force pushes this freshly laid sand layer up through the rest of it before all this stuff had a chance to harden. That indicates a catastrophic geologic process consistent with the flood. By the way, this picture is right at the visitor center, and they don't know how that formed. But when you go out, you see, look at this one right here. Wow, there was my older van. Wow. For size comparison, now look at this one in the distance. Here's one of those pipes sticking right straight up, and all you see are the top is the top of it. In this particular layer or area in Kodachrome, there are at least 65 to 150 or maybe 200 of these features. Wonderful place to go. Beautiful scenery. We take students there on field trips. It fits with the flood. I can't see how it fits with much else. It fits with a violent flood, the fountains of the great deep opening up, the whole world being covered with water. Okay? Currents traveling at 150 miles per hour, 1,000 feet deep. It's going to erode everything that was there before and then redistribute that after the flood. Or during the calmer parts of the flood. And those particular currents would plane off whatever was there. And there's a spot right there. You can actually see it with, this is Pikes Peak granite here. Now this layer is a type of sandstone. Interesting thing about this sandstone, this is found Bill Hoshin, Mary Jo and I were looking at this. This sandstone is found near Colorado Springs at Glen Eyrie. And we put together a field trip to that area. And what happens is that Pikes Peak granite below is planed off, just like you find in the Grand Canyon. You find the Grand Canyon, you find the black material at the bottom of the canyon planed off. And then a sandstone of the very same type being deposited on top of that. Well, this planing off is called the Great Unconformity, and it's worldwide. Okay? Again, something happened here, planing off all of these mountains. Now, the interesting thing is this sandstone layer, Saguache sandstone at Colorado Springs. But guess what? It's just a different name of the very same pancake pore. And in fact, that pancake pore is also found at the Grand Canyon. It is called the top heat sandstone. But look there, in this sandstone layer, look at this blocks of rock. And you can see the water, how it kind of pooled around it. This was basically a huge catastrophic flow. But now the top heat sandstone doesn't stop even at the Grand Canyon. You find it clear down into Mexico, way down below. And you find it all the way across North America. Look at this, goes all the way to the eastern seaboard. And then erosion stripped it off here. But now you find this channel going all the way up north of Greenland. North of Greenland. This is all the same pancake pore as the top heat sandstone at the Grand Canyon or the one I showed you at Colorado Springs area. What does this tell you when you have so much erosion going on, so much deposition? It says that this flood was not a local flood. This is regional, isn't it? Transcontinental in this particular case. And that's a big pancake layer of rock, isn't it? The top heat sandstone. But we find other ones too. Massive amounts of limestone, Madison limestone, Redwall limestone, Glorieta. All of these are the same limestone layer, the same pancake, covering a great share of the United States. All right. Again, what's it tell you? This is not a local flood. You look at the Glen area near Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak pushed up this area when the mountain rose up and the valleys were sinking down. Pike's Peak came up and it drug the layers with it. And so the layers are now standing on end. They were once flat, horizontal layers. They're standing on end. But if you follow these layers, you go underneath the city of Colorado Springs, and you find out they flatten out there. Now that they're flat, they go all the way across the plains, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Big pancake, but it doesn't stop there. It also continues across the ocean. You find it as the White Cliffs of Dover, and then you find it much even into Israel, etc. Hey, Scott, looks like I still have some of the Spanish in this thing. I guess I grabbed the different line. These are even bigger pancakes. These are transoceanic layers, which again speaks of a worldwide catastrophic thing of Noah's flood. So the most documented biblical event, besides the resurrection, okay, the most documented biblical event, or one of the most, is well supported. You know, you have 6 to 8, chapters 6 through 8, and then all the other writers talking about it as well. But you also find archaeological evidence all over the world from different finds. You find cultural evidences of that flood when you have 270 flood legends from around the world. And they all seem to have the common theme. These are areas where they didn't even have missionary activity. So what are they looking at? The same event, now recorded in their particular customs of their country. And so again, worldwide evidence of that flood, okay? Then there's much geologic evidence worldwide as well of Noahic flood. So Noah's flood, was it fiction or reality? I say reality, okay? Reality, very much so. And so that really supports the reliability of the Bible. Because why? Chapters 6 through 8 of the Bible are the most contested by secular geologists. They're contested even by Bible believers and Christian colleges. How can you believe in Noah and the flood? Isn't that just a cute little kid story? No, there's evidence that we should take it seriously. And if we take that part of the Bible seriously, we see the evidence that even Genesis chapter 6 through 8 are true. We better start taking John 3:16 seriously, and what Jesus Christ did on the cross on behalf of our sins. Just like there was an ark in the past, there's going to be another judgment someday. But God always sends a way of escaping when he sends judgment. The ark was that way. Today, it's through the cross of Jesus Christ, the blood shed that will pay for our sins. And that if we believe that, we accept that, and we understand Jesus is the Messiah, he is the Lord, he's the Savior of the earth, then that is our new ark of salvation. So that's what we need to do. A lot of people think, oh, well, Old Testament is law and New Testament is grace. But I want you to understand, even with the flood, the grace of God. According to the Bible, Noah found favor or grace in the eyes of the Lord. So he is looking for those who are righteous, those who will believe him. The ark, God protect those who believe. And he's even interested in animals. All right. All right. So he protects those animals so that they can now replenish or let's say they can fill the earth. Replenish actually doesn't mean redo something. It means fill. So they fill the earth once again, as it said in Genesis in the creation week. Get this. Noah's wife, his sons and daughter-in-laws get to go. How would you feel if your daughter-in-law, your son couldn't get to go on board, and they drowned out there in the ocean. Boy, I don't think that would be good. God shows mercy here and grace. God is present with Noah. It's kind of interesting because just before the flood, God says, enter into the ark. He's beckoning Noah in. Okay, so it shows positionally, where's God? He's with Noah. God's grace right there. His presence is there. Now look at this one. God closes the door, not Noah. Noah probably wasn't strong enough to do it, but God closes the ark door. And that means that Noah doesn't have to think, oh, I did not shut all these people out. They chose not to get on board the ark. God is the one that closed them out. And so, but then God remembers Noah during this whole time of the flood. He remembers, and it wasn't kind of, oh, I forgot all about Noah. I wonder how he's doing down there. Not at all. God remembers Noah. It's a remembrance of a watchful care for Noah. And God's promise, again, sign of rainbow. Why? Because he knows the hearts of the people too, right? And he gets the sign of the rainbow, not to send another flood like that again. Again, see God's grace, even in judgment. And he always provides a way of escape for those who will believe him, just like the ark and just like the cross in Jesus Christ today. And so I'm going to stop that program right here, although I'm going to show you a couple other things. But anyhow, let me just go through them real quickly. I've been talking about this Canyonlands Arches Tour coming out in next Think and Believe. You're going to see it as well. Canyonlands Arches Tour, April 9 to 10. This is if you want to see Arches National Park. It's an amazing place of sandstone features. It's just beautiful, just beautiful. And or you go to Canyonlands. Look at these great big canyons out there, and you see amazing sights there too. And what caused Upheaval Dome? We'll go to those sites so you can see and just imagine what's going on here. And we're going to talk to you about the amazing things there, but how these events are awesome events and how it fits with recorded history from the Bible. So that's what this thing is about. And then we're also going to be doing the creation teaching workshop for those who want to teach creation, and they'll do it. And we'll give them a hands-on experience teaching, where our staff is going to be right alongside of all the participants, not just shoveling out information, although of course we're going to share information along the way, but it'll be additional information. But it's hands-on, how to teach, what to teach, what do you do in difficult situations, and then we're even going to take a couple of day trips here, or afternoon trips, I should say, showing you some more events like Colorado National Monument, which is just right outside of Grand Junction. The canyon within a canyon, that's in this area. And so how about the Dinosaur Museum? We'll go visit that as well. But we're going to have picnics up there. We're going to enjoy time together, discussing material, helping you learn to be able to share with others, whether it be your Sunday school class or just your family. It doesn't matter. Hopefully we'll do that. Remember, make sure you get our publication, Think and Believe. Send me an email. We'll get you on there, or just go on the website and you can sign up for that Think and Believe as well. Remember our Yellowstone National Park Tour. It is an amazing spot. That's going to be August, September. Wait a minute. Oh, 2022. Okay. August 26th through August 30. Those are the right dates, or August 31st, August 31st, and then September 2 through 6. So come and join us for amazing stuff at Yellowstone National Park. Costa Rica adventure. We didn't get to do it again this year. Too many restrictions due to COVID. And so, but hopefully, maybe next year. But please let us know of your interest in the Costa Rica tour. We'd love to have you come with us, join us, and see the amazing things of Costa Rica. The design is just absolutely breathtaking. Design of a bill of a toucan. It's not just eye candy, one coat I have. It's actually a heat regulator system. Okay. All right. Books that go along with it. How do you explain all the fossils? The Flood sure does a good job of that. All right. And then the fossil record, one of the best books I know of the fossil record. And then the guidebook to the Grand Canyon, I already mentioned that. We also have one on Yellowstone, one on Bryce Canyon as well. The Global Flood. Some of the things I've been talking about is found in the Global Flood book by Dr. John Morris. And one of the latest books that came out is called Flooded. If you can get by the graphic picture on the front cover, it is a really amazingly great book talking about the flood and fossils and other aspects of creation. I really highly recommend that book. Again, available at our office. Go online, you can look at it. But I'm going to recommend, if you go online, find the books you want, then call the office. And Gail can give you a better deal on the shipping if you call the office. Okay? And our Discover Creation DVD series, includes a 75-page full color study guide. This is 8.5 by 11. The whole thing is only $35, and there's 12 sessions. You can use that to teach in your own home, school, Sunday school classes, etc. But amazing amount of material there for you with all references throughout. Okay, so now I'm going to stop sharing. Are there any questions now? Okay.
I have a question.
Okay, Connie.
So you talked about Southern California rock layers, and you gave some name of a place. What was the name of that place?
Okay, there's a couple of places there. Split Mountain is one of them, where an earthquake actually cracked the mountain open and revealed that it's made up of those water-worn boulders. Okay, Split Mountain.
Okay.
And that is in a section of what's called the Anza Borrego Desert.
ANZA.
ANZA Borrego. Anza Borrego Desert. And it's right close by to, not too far from Indio. Is it Indio, California, right, Mary Jo?
Where
Yeah.
is that? South or north or what?
Yeah, I know where it is.
By
South,
the Salton Sea.
south.
You know,
Yeah.
the big Salton Sea down there. The Salton Sea is a area where it used to be a sea in that area. You can see from the Native American habitations that were around an old shoreline of that lake. And but that lake got refilled early 1905, 1906, I think, when they were actually trying to dig a canal off of the Colorado River to be able to irrigate the Imperial Valley. And well, they irrigated it all right. The canal, they got too deep, and the entire Colorado River ended up coming through that canal. All right. And refilled the Salton Sea before they could get that thing dammed back up.
Why did
again.
that happen?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, they were trying to dig the canal, and it just happened that the the area of the Imperial Valley is lower in elevation than the Colorado River at that point. I would say, so they got too deep and the water came crashing through there.
Okay. And then
By the way, it formed a new canyon, they called it there, out of Barstow, California. So
then I have a question. Near where you guys are, you have the Book Cliffs
Mhm.
and those, like, is it that tallest plateau or what are those called?
Grand Mesa.
The Grand Mesa? Yeah.
the
how
Book
did-
Cliffs formation, the Grand
Yeah.
Mesa, yes.
What are the Book Cliffs? How were they formed?
It basically, there is a big fault that runs along Grand Junction. Okay. The layers that make up the Book Cliffs are made up of a shale type material. It's made up of the Manca Shale, Mesa Verde Shale, and the Green River formations, which are, they say, of Cretaceous seas. Okay, is what the idea is. And that's where you find the fossil fish, by the way, are in those Green River shales. But they extend extensively up through into Wyoming, not only Colorado. And but then they actually went over the top of the Colorado National Monument at one time. But forces pushed the Uncompahgre Plateau off. Most of that then washed out of there. So you only see tiny remnants above the Colorado National Monument now of the major formation called Green River Formation. And so you find these layers that were put down flat, but now you have the Uncompahgre uplift that pushes the whole Colorado National Monument and even all the way into the Grand Canyon, etc. Pushes that whole region up in big uplift. So Pinyon Mesa above the Colorado National Monument is about over 9,000 feet. Okay. Now you also have this uplift. You have the valley kind of sinking down. So Colorado National Monument, you can see it kind of curving its way up. Okay. That's what happens in a fault with soft sediment, by the way. Okay. And so you see that, but the valley sank down. There's a fault on one side of the valley. This other side tilted up like this, another fault. And the fat side of it is what you are seeing called the Book Cliffs. Okay. And the Grand Mesa is it has the same formations on the lower part as you see in the Book Cliffs as well. So it's part of that upheaval there. Now, but Grand Mesa got covered by a volcanic layer. And so it resisted the erosion from the runoff.
Probably from Yellowstone.
What's that?
Probably from Yellowstone.
No, it looks like there are fissure type cracks the volcanic lava oozed out of, forming the cap on top of Grand Mesa.
Mhm.
And toward Parachute, I found some sputter cones as well, okay, of volcanic material. And that's not very far away from Grand Mesa. So it had its own volcanics going separate from Yellowstone.
What's a sputter cone?
A sputter cone is where a volcano is kind of going bloop, bloop, bloop. Okay.
Okay.
Putting a lava up into the air and it falls down, but it's not the huge eruption like Mount St. Helens. It just blew its top. Okay.
Okay.
So it's very different.
Is there, can you recommend someplace that I could see some pictures? You know, those aerial pictures you said they had of the giant ripples. I would like to look at that.
Okay. Patty, what I'd recommend that you do
Mm-hmm.
is go to, I'm going to say DuckDuckGo. I'm not recommending Google anymore.
Good.
DuckDuckGo. and look for dry falls aerial views
Okay.
and see if you can find them.
What I did too was just, if you Google or whatever, giant ripples, there are giant ripples
Giant
in
ripple marks too.
Siberia.
Yeah,
And there are those in eastern Washington, like in the channeled scablands of eastern Washington, and
exactly.
yeah,
Right, because I'm in that area,
Yeah, that it's amazing what you see there.
yeah, they're right
Uh,
near Quincy, Washington. I lived in Quincy when I was a little girl, so.
Quincy. So you know Quincy,
Mhm.
how about the feather ridges? Did you get to the feather ridges?
No,
These are big columnar basalt, the columns that are like 30, 40, 50 feet in diameter. And those were cooled from lava flows. But a feathered ridge is where the reason it's feathered is the Missoula flood came down through that area and it went down into this channel, went down into this channel, and the ridge in between is a narrow little knife ridge called Feather Ridge. Okay, if you look at it from the aerial, it looks like a row of feathers there.
Hmm.
It's not that narrow, but it's really an interesting place. Students love to climb, and rock climbers like to climb those basalt columns too. But that's Feather Ridge. That's right outside of Quincy too. All right, and the big old ripple marks, yeah, you can see them down. You can even see them at Quincy, but you can also see them down the Columbia Gorge. Different ripple marks.
Oh,
And you can see those ripple marks as the Columbia Gorge is almost at Portland. You see those up high. But if you go all the way to Montana, you again see those ripple marks in the bottom of the Lake Missoula as it's draining.
yeah, there might
And
be an article about it if you look in the website of Answers in Genesis. I don't know, is that
okay.
okay if I mention these guys and
Mhm.
for you? But they have a lot of different articles about many of these national monuments and parks and natural geologic features and things like
Yeah,
that.
they have there, and ICR.org as well
Mhm.
has a number of those good articles to look at to get more information. Creation Ministries International, CMI.com, I think. No, it's creation.com is what it is. It's the Creation Ministries International. It's creation.com, not org on that one. Okay, but those are good resources, wonderful articles, and I highly recommend those.
well, I'm gonna look
As
into
well as
it.
AIG, of course.
Yes, did you get my email regarding coming out there, Dave?
Oh, Patty, I did. I sent it on. Did you get any answer on that?
No, I didn't get anything.
Oh, I copied Gail, but I also copied Mary Jo in hopes that she would answer you. I'm sorry.
Well, unless it went in the junk mail and I didn't find it, I look there
Oh,
periodically.
that happens periodically. Keep
Right.
checking your junk mail. I
I
hate
may
that when it does happen, but
I'll have to look, see. I
all
get
right.
so many emails that if I don't get right on them, they disappear down the bottom of it.
Yeah, it's really,
Yeah, I know how that goes. Where was that email I was going to answer?
Yeah.
yeah, even in one day, I can't believe it how many emails I have to sort through to get to what I thought I was looking for.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to coming to Colorado. I haven't been back there for years.
All right, very good. Who else is coming? Josh,
so-
you and Melody coming?
Wish we could.
Yeah, that'd be great. Hey, Jim, you ought to take part in that, what we're doing there. And also on that tour of the Canyonlands and Arches. I think you'd enjoy that. Mhm. And Brian, you might have to join us on that tour too.
And maybe Amy.
And Amy and all the kids.
Yeah,
Good friends with Josh and Melody.
Connie, have you had any success in thinking about coming over for that training?
I honestly haven't had time to think about it.
Okay.
Okay.
We were in San Diego last weekend to visit our oldest daughter and her husband, and that's why it was interesting because we were right on the coastline of the Pacific Ocean, and I saw all these layers that were, maybe 1 inch, but it was obviously mud layers, mud. But within those layers were boulders that, were great big boulders right in the middle of the layers. I'm like,
Isn't
well,
that
those
interesting?
obviously went in there when this was quite wet. So
Yeah,
That's great. You're applying what you're learning. That's good.
that's
it
right.
was interesting.
You're
Yeah.
going to start seeing them all the time. When you go on a field trip with me, it's kind of amazing. I'll be pointing out things, and one of the things I like to point out, boulders.
Mhm.
And pretty soon all I have to do is point, and the people in the bus say, boulders.
Because wherever you have boulders, you have to ask, why is it there?
Why are they there?
Yeah.
Carried by lots of water.
Mm-hmm.
And it had been deep water and high velocity water in order to carry some of those size boulders.
Well, and that's what was interesting with the things I read about the giant ripples is that people who are a lot smarter in math than I am would look at the height of the ripples and then the distance between the crests of each one, and
Yep.
then they can determine the speed of the water that could cause those ripples.
And depth.
Yeah,
Speed and
yeah.
depth. Uh-huh.
And so there, how many miles per hour the water was going and how deep the water was to make it. And it's like, okay, that's amazing.
That's why they say 65 miles per hour, at
Mhm,
least.
mhm,
And that's one you don't want to try to outrun.
mhm.
Yeah, I don't think my river raft would be quite enough.
I doubt it, Patty. I don't think so. That'd be, if we think about the big Grand Lake breaking that formed part of the Grand Canyon, wouldn't that have been or the Glen Canyon Dam that almost lost it? Remember all the big erosion that happened in just a couple hours? If that dam would have gone, that would have been a wild raft ride down the Grand Canyon too.
Mhm.
Yeah, all the rafters wanted to go when they let the water loose. How many years ago that was?
Yeah, they do that periodically, actually, let some down there. And you
I
were
went
down
there-
there when they did that?
No, I just remember all the rafters that I knew. Everybody was applying to be able to go, I don't live there anymore, so now I don't hear about it,
Okay, yeah.
All the river rafters all were like, we're putting in for our permit when they do that.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you have any explanation for, like in Colorado, in the middle of the mountains, you have North Park and you have, was it Middle Park and Central Park or South Park?
Yeah.
And when we drive through that part of the mountains, I mean, it seems like there are some places where there are just giant sand dunes and other places where it's, washed out. And I'm like, is that part of when those lakes that were formed by the Ice Age breached their ice dams or whatever? Did they rush through that part of Colorado? Because that's not exactly, when you were showing the map, that part of central Colorado wasn't showing there.
That's right. It wasn't. If you look at Sand Dunes National
Yeah,
Park,
those are
National
formed,
Monument.
those are different because they're just formed by the sand that comes over across the mountains. But these are just covered with
Well, that's what
sagebrush
they
and
tell
things.
you. You know what I think it is?
What?
Beachfront sand
Hmm.
from a huge lake in that region.
Huh.
And then when that would have broken, it would have gone right down, helping to form some of the big canyons down through there.
Hmm.
Yep.
How do you think the three parks were formed then? Because they're flat.
The big long flat, they look like lake bottoms, don't they?
Yeah, they do, but they're way up there.
Yeah, they are. that can cause a lot of damage when they collapse.
Huh.
There's a huge lake way up there in is that Lake Titicaca or something like that in Peru,
In the Andes, yeah.
in the Andes, I think.
Mhm.
Amazing. And I would love to apply for a grant and go in that area to look at that big, because there's a huge lake there now. And yet there's evidence that that lake was much bigger in the past than it is today.
So you
There's
think
evidence of
possibly
that.
the mountains uplifted and the valley floors dropped, and that's what
Yeah.
caused those parks?
Very likely that was the case. Mhm.
Hmm.
There's another one on the, I think it's on the uh, Argentina border. And basically there's, what were those ruins? I'm trying to remember the names of those.
Machu Picchu?
Nope, not that one. There's some other ruins that the ruins of the city are way up high on a cliff. And they realized that, wait a minute, there was a lot of people. There were a lot of people there one time. There's no way that that area can support that kind of people, that number of people. And besides that, this particular city is built out of a certain type of let's call it a red rock, layered rock. It's like a sandstone. It's built out of those particular rocks. And the closest source to those rocks are across this big flat plain about 200 miles away.
Hmm.
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 And between the city and the flat plain is a great big canyon.
Hmm.
So they would have to, in order to be able to take those rocks, they had to go bring them all the way across that plain. Then they'd have to go down that river and then back up another 1,000 feet plus another 1,000 feet or so with those rocks.
So where'd they come from?
Good point.
So maybe there was some water there.
Ah, Patty,
Yeah.
you got it. Now you're thinking like that. Okay, you're starting to see it. And sure enough, geologists had found one shoreline of a lake at that rock outcrop of the quarry, you might call it. The other shoreline of that lake at the edge of the city. Okay, they just rafted those rocks across that 200 miles. The rivers, when they catastrophically drained, formed that canyon. Okay, and so now you have a raging river there. Now you know why the people no longer live there.
Yeah. So if we're looking, at a big picture, like there's big flood, then there's the ice age, and then and then was it like, are we postulating as the ice age started melting, it formed these great lakes? Is that?
Okay, I think you're onto it. Basically, we have the flood, first of all, right?
Mhm.
Conditions during the flood, you have a lot of undersea volcanism, major volcanism. You can see around the world some of the huge underwater deposited lavas, like even in India, 100,000 square miles. That's going to heat up that water, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, that's going to heat it up quite a bit. And when you see these around the world, you say that was a lot of heat going into the water. So it's enough to heat the temperature of the oceans by quite a few degrees. I'm not saying hundreds of degrees, but at 20, 30 degrees at least, you can get that water heated up. Now you have, after the flood, you have the warm oceans. And what you see is the land is coming up. Land will cool down faster than water. That's a known principle. And if you now have the uplifts, you have elevation change. So you're going to have the cooler, the landmass even cooling more. And then pretty soon, lots of precipitation, even after the flood. By the way, you're going to have a lot of rain, okay, because of the very warm oceans. And then they are so warm, then basically the uplift, pretty soon, the rain eventually turns to snow. When you get the first snow, the temperature can plummet. There's one case that they found out that after the first snow up in Montana one time, it was a early part of the 1900s, the temperature plummeted 100 degrees Fahrenheit,
Ooh,
roughly 24 hours.
whoa.
Okay. But keep in mind, once it now gets really cold, you're going to get a lot more of that hot, moist air coming off those warm oceans, dumping all kinds of wet snow in those areas. And that'll build up into what's now we call glacial ice. All right.
Mhm.
And so how long would that take to form the glaciers? Michael Ord, in his several of his publications, he was a doctor of meteorology. His calculations show you can have the total advance and actually retreat of the glaciers within 500 years. That's all it takes. And the conditions of the flood with the hot ocean, the hot water, the warm air masses coming over the cooler continent makes great sense for forming these glaciers. Today, scientists say we don't have the conditions that would form glaciers today. I don't care how cold it is in Minnesota. Okay. All right. But you don't have enough of those kind of conditions. So, but how can you form a glacier? You have to have a lot warmer ocean. The differential between ocean water temperature and land temperature has to be greater than it is today. And so now you get that glaciation going on, and you get things like even after the flood, you get all kinds of weather currents, whatever. You get lots of wind-blown material. And many of the mammoths are found in ice. Some of them are actually found standing in wind-blown sands and
Like up in Wyoming.
silts. Huh?
In Wyoming, the
Wyoming?
Great Mammoth site.
That was that supposedly windblown
I
sand?
thought it was, but maybe not.
Okay,
It's been years since
possibly.
I've been there.
Yeah, I was thinking that was probably water deposited sand there, but I may be wrong. Okay. I don't, unfortunately, don't get up to Wyoming enough. That's a great place to visit, but not in winter. I've done seminars in Cody, Wyoming, and further northeast, and I remember looking at the temperature gauge that they had a thermometer there, and it was minus 26 below 26 below zero, I think. And we were in a vehicle that the heater was not working well.
Not good.
Oh
So
my.
let me ask you this, Dave. So as conditions changed, some of those glaciers started melting. I mean,
Yep.
obviously, and is that what would have formed like Lake Missoula and some of those other mega
Okay.
lakes?
Yeah, thank you for getting me back on track again. And so, yes, you would have then the ice age damming up water channels or water the rivers, say, and forms these big lakes like Lake Missoula, which eventually the water crashes through, sending a wall of water downstream, forming channel scablands. Okay. So that's what you have. But you also have other lakes doing the same thing, both in Wyoming, etc. And so those lakes are now gone. But you do see evidence of those dry lake beds all over. You see those. Okay.
Okay, so like eastern Siberia and the Far East there, the Russian Far East, now they supposedly weren't covered with glaciers, although, you know, the western part was. Now, why would you postulate that? I mean, I don't know.
Well, that's a big lake that burst in the out of the Altai
Altaic, yeah.
Mountains area,
Mhm.
and that particular collapse of that lake is what formed the big flooding that was 10 times the size of Lake Missoula. Okay,
Okay.
and
So
was
where
actually-
would the lake have been? Would it have been southeast of the Altai Mountains? Like, would it have been in Mongolia? Would it have been in Inner Mongolia? Would it have
I
been
think
on the
it
west side?
was in, I believe it was Siberia. That's
Okay.
where it was, and but it headed south. All right.
It
What
I
headed
was the
believe
name
south.
of
south and east, I believe, if I remember. now.
Oh, okay. I was
Uh-huh.
picturing it going up into the Arctic, but it did. It went the other way.
I think so.